always a pretty athletic kid. I played a bunch of different sports, and I tried all the instruments and everything, and that just never really took. I swam a little bit. I dove a little bit. I played basketball. I played softball. I played football for a little while. And so softball and baseball really were the ones that spoke to me the most as a fan and as an athlete. And so I started to play softball when I was not quite 8 years old and was playing around with some neighborhood kids, throwing balls back and forth, and was like, wow, I'm kind of good at this. My mom saw a sign for the local league and signed me up, and then the rest was history. And I played all the way through. I ended my career after high school by choice. The recruiting environment was really very different at that time. College softball was still a thing, but not nearly what it's become in the years since. So that's pretty much my athletic journey. In high school, I played basketball as well for a couple of years. And like I said, football for 1 year. Softball was the one that I played all throughout high school.
So it sounds like you were a bit of a general somewhat early on.
Absolutely. I mean, I always loved to just play with other kids, be outside, be active and doing things, whether it's at work or whether it's in life. That's kind of who I am. So then I just found outlets for that.
So why do you think you didn't pursue softball into collegiate sports?
There were a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, I didn't have a great concept of what it meant to go beyond high school, of what it meant to go play a sport and what that would look like. I think one mistake that I see adults make with kids is kids will express an interest in something or say, hey, maybe I want to try this. And the immediate response that I hear is, well, but then you're going to have to do this, and then you're going to have to do that. And then and it goes, all the way down the road when it may just be exploring an interest. So I think I got into my head a little bit about what all of that commitment might look like. I regret not pursuing it a little bit more than I did. And I think I was a little bit burnt out after the high school experience. And I've coached high schools too. And so you get who you get based on the districts, and people are there for different reasons. Some are there to get better and play a sport. Some are there to put it on the resume for college. Some are there to just kill some time. We didn't win. I think we won one game in 4 years. It was tough. And I was kind of like, yeah, I'm done. But after college, started coaching, just like went back to the batting cages like I always would, met some people, and the rest was history from there. I met my first pitching client, and it all just happened.
Athlete different than the pressures of being a coach?
That's an interesting question. I think pressure for anyone is largely self-imposed. There can be external circumstances, certainly, but it's kind of how we read into those external circumstances. I think for athletes, because they tend to be younger, it can be difficult to discern what are relevant pressures and what are pressures that are being put upon them, right? Mm-hmm. And just like there are relevant cues and irrelevant cues when you're playing a game, there's people cheering, there's people heckling, you can smell the hot dogs from the snack stand. What is the relevant cue that you need to focus on? And it's the same thing. And so I think for athletes, it can become very difficult to distill all of the input, because our tendency with kids, teens, college students is to give a lot of input and not leave a ton of room for interpretation, for learning, for discovery, that I think, while we have so much access to information now, I think is a loss from when I was growing up. Go out and play, figure out what you can do, try different ways. There are sort of basics to stick to, but other than that, have fun with it. And I think that pressure, adults tend to be a little bit more able to, if not totally able to distill, at least able to put away for a while, and kids tend to take everything on. And so I see a lot of stress coming in with kids that I work with, and it's not that it's nefarious in its intent. It's not that people mean to stress these kids out. It's just that's how they tend to internalize a lot.
They haven't yet learned to parse it out of this is this person's and this is mine.
Honestly, as a coach, that's where I see my biggest role. There's a finite amount of information about any physical task, and there's a lot of information. The differentiator for people who become truly elite in any activity is their ability to work through the other stuff, right? Because we can all learn to do a task. I became a better hitter now than I ever was as an athlete, and I learned that later in life. So you can always learn a new skill, but it's the ability to deal with the other stuff. And so as a coach, I think being a mirror rather than lighting a fire, kind of showing people or helping them to see, I'm capable of this, or I might want to think about this a different way, because all it takes is that internal adjustment sometimes to really make a difference in someone's performance. And so that's really where I see my biggest role is, yes, to teach them something, but also to teach them how to think about something, or maybe just different ways to think about something, and that there are different ways.
Are you working with helping helping kids parse out, I think this applies to adults too, like afferent and inferent information.
Yeah, exactly. We do this in different ways, right? Because it's not for me, ultimately, I mean, a kid is going to go and be in whatever environment they're going to be in. And so if they are in an environment where, say, it's a parent or a sibling or anything that is sort of external to them, and they're going to be in that environment, I'm not going to go in and say, don't listen to your dad. But what I might say is, let's identify which thing is the most relevant right now, which thing is the one that, based on your goal, and I do a lot of like, what do you want to do here? Why don't you define this, so that they feel that sense of agency? What's the thing that we need to pay attention, or what are the two things that we need to pay attention to? It at least helps them start to categorize, and they can start applying that elsewhere.
How have you used that skill set in your own performance?
One thing in my athletic journey growing up, and then my fitness journey, I did a little bit of strength training, but particularly for women, it just wasn't as visible at the time. And now it's much more so, especially with social media. And so I got into lifting with you, I mean, over the past 4 years. And there have been some things that have come out of that have been incredibly helpful, both in my teaching, in my life. The constant discipline, like if you have this one goal, work for that one thing. The concept of distilling information has been really important. I am a person who tends to just want to go whole hog. Let me dive in. I get really enthusiastic about things, and then it's not sustainable for everything in my life. And so then a week and a half later, I fall off and I feel like a failure and I don't do it anymore. And I've had that habit. And what strength training helped me to work with my athletes, kind of the micro goal setting. And when you and I first started working together, I always tell this story. You asked me how many times a week I thought I could lift. And I was like 4 or 5. This is during the pandemic. And I had a gym at the place I was living at the time. And you said, how about we do a month where you get 2 a week consistently, 8 workouts, 2 per week. And then we can start thinking about adding a third day. And it was really difficult for me to do that because I had to not only do those workouts, but also not do things and have the discipline, not do things where it was just, you got to go do this first. And if you really want to get stronger, if you really want to change your physique, if you want to lift this amount. And that was hard for me at first as an adult. I mean, I was in my 30s when we started, and that was difficult for me. But micro goal setting really helped with that because 2 was manageable. 1 was manageable for a while. Just like when we started doing push-ups, I was doing sets of 1, and that's not forever. It really does compound. I tend to think in 0 and 100, and there are all of these steps in between. And kids are very much like that. And that was a part of me that was not matured. And I don't necessarily claim to be mature now, but a part of me that is maturing. And that is a part of me that was reacting in that way that I see a lot of kids react, which is I want it now, particularly kids coming up in the age where they have phones and they have Netflix and they don't have to wait a week for shows usually. And they can just kind of point and click. And this is something that requires, it's not necessarily hard, but it is consistent, and consistency is difficult. Simple, but not easy.
How do you try to help the kids that you work with narrow their focus so they can work towards a specific goal at a time?
Technology is a blessing and a curse, and access to information is a blessing and a curse. I think it would have really helped somebody like me to see clearly. We have a program called Hit Tracks, for example. So you can set it for an age group. You can see if it's a hit, if it's an out, how high, how hard, how far, all of this stuff. And so very quickly get feedback more than just, hey, that was a really hard hit. It felt cool. It hit the net coming back at the coach. It's actual feedback. But it can be overwhelming. Once kids know how to read that, they can just get fixated. And a lot of the time you see a kid swinging and they're looking over at the TV while they're swinging. So sometimes we'll pick one thing and sometimes we turn it off. Sometimes I'll say, let's look at your angles. You tell me you want to hit more, you want to hit harder. We're going to do that with line drives. Let's look at your launch angle. I don't even care what the exit velocity is. I want you to try to hit this between 10 and 20 degrees. And so they start learning what that looks like, or they pick a place on the field that they want to hit it to, or they pick a spot that they want to pitch it to and work to that or something. Like we go very small, because then when we expand, we shoot for a tiny target, because then even if we miss it slightly, we tend to be more productive because we have a goal.
Mm-hmm.
When we're just out there, and one thing I say to kids and young adults all the time is try to, if they're hitting, for example, hit somewhere, not anywhere. Have a plan, because even if you totally miss, even if you're trying to hit it to left field and you go to right field, you're still hitting with intent. And so you're going to tend to be more productive with how you do that. And then you also don't feel like you failed because you actually were in pursuit of something specific.
I find that with like powerlifting too. It was always one lift was going well, one was like okay or just staying still, and one was giving me trouble, buds and thorns, always with everything.
I find that too. There's always like one, and it rotates just depending on whatever's going on in life.
I do a whole lot of positional sparring where I'll ask everybody to start from one position with me just over and over and over again until I feel comfortable with it before moving on to a different position.
And looking for different cues. The thing about working with young athletes is that the reason people get weird habits or get into slumps, we're looking at it in the mirror because kids know how to move. Human beings are born understanding how to move. You see a baby squat down to pick something up, and it's the most beautiful squat form you've ever seen in your life. And then somewhere along the way, we hold ourselves differently, we do different things, and we get tighter. You tell kids, and this works with college students too, it works with young adults. You find a cue that's going to work for them, like hit it over my head, or throw it through the catcher, or high five the catcher on the way through, and they do it. You got to find the cues, because then they're not thinking, am I doing it right? They're thinking, am I aiming over her? And taking away, there's so much, there's that voice that's in all of us. And when you can find a way to turn it off and just have, there are coaches I work with that say no long thoughts. I love that. Just think one word or two words maximum, and that's all that's in their head, quieting. Yeah.
I see a lot of clients that I'm working with their movement, and they'll be like, well, I don't feel it in my hamstrings, or I'm trying to focus on this. But that looking for those internal cues is often misleading, because we're operating from the position that we're always in. The position.
Right. My best work has gotten me here. My best work has gotten me to the weight is that I'm at right now, or whatever I'm able to hit. My pitching velocity is, as someone who likes to feel in control, and as an athlete who pitched, and as an athlete in those types of positions where you feel like you have some modicum of control over how the game goes, looking outside yourself occasionally. And that's an ego exercise, right? And it's not that anybody thinks they're better or worse than anybody else necessarily. It's just that I think as athletes, I got to do this, I got to solve this problem right away. And I'm just going to do what I know works or has worked at some point, once or twice and served me. And that's just what I know. Instead of, let me try this thing and suck at it for a while. Ultimately, it might make me better. So one thing I tell kids is give it 100 tries before you tell me it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work after that, that's fine. Take what works and leave the rest.
And the interesting thing from a performance perspective, anytime you're dealing with power or having to generate a lot of force, so powerlifting, Olympic lifting, most every sport, they have found that it is better to use external cues, the floor, the ball, high-fiving whoever, hitting over somebody's head, something external to you works better to get the thing. Versus if you're looking at more bodybuilding or more slower physical therapy type, looking internal can be valuable in that context. But if you're trying to do power or a lot of weight, then external cues are the way to go.
My feelings lie to me all the time. So there's an endurance interval that I do with a lot of pitchers to build velocity in the off season. And we basically go like grab and go. We do a lot of throwing. We time them and try to increase the number of reps that they're able to get, to increase efficiency in their movement, to help them flush any kind of extra stuff that they do. And then we make them do some kind of either an aerobic or strength exercise in between. And we do that in blocks to simulate exhaustion throughout a game or throughout a tournament, when they very well may be throwing for an entire game. I had a girl doing this the other day, and it was her first time. Most of my older pitchers are kind of used to this, and they know like we're going to be miserable, but this kid had never done it before. And she said a couple times, like, I can't do this. And I'm like, you think you can't do it. You feel like you can't do it. That's absolutely true. But I've yet to have somebody perish during this exercise. And she got through it, and she did awesome. She actually did better than some of this was a younger kid, 7th grader, some of my high school athletes in terms of her efficiency of movement. But there was that moment of where her body and her feelings started panicking. I've been there and failed on lifts and then had to go back. I was with you once when I've done my deadlift PR, and the first one, I didn't get above that like 4 or 6 inch off the floor to where I knew I could get the leverage. And so the next try was like, let me just get past that 4 to 6 inches and see what I can do then, right? All I've got to do is get it 4 to 6 inches. I don't have to go all the way up. I just have to get it there. And that's what and I said, you don't have to go crazy, just get through it. And damn it if she did. And I see this with kids all the time. They think they can't, and maybe they're told they can't. But then if we push just a little bit, not crazy, just a little bit, that shows them that maybe there's not total truth to that. And so then that opens up their viewpoint.
And whether you're a baseball player, a softball player, a power lifter, a jiu-jitsu athlete, an endurance athlete, there is going to be a time in training and in sport where you're going to have to push past, I think I can't do this. What are some of those opportunities in training? What were some of the tools that you used to help athletes bridge that gap?
One thing that I love to do, no matter whether I'm working with a baseball athlete, softball athlete. I like to do things that involve rapid fire because it eliminates the ability to think. When we eliminate the ability to have those long thoughts, they just have to execute. We get into rhythms. My assistant last year would do this like fungo madness drill, which is a rapid rhythmic fielding drill. Kids are just running all over the place. Like they're throwing, they have to run immediately to the next station, and it's chaos. They get so many reps and they think, oh, we can't get to this number, but we just go through it, and they do it with ease. And so you think before, you think after, and you can really amaze yourself with what you're capable of. We can't let this get in the way. And there are some sports, basketball is one where it moves really quickly and it lends itself well to stuff like that. Baseball and softball are slower moving games. And you'll hear people say they're played in the 5 inches between your ears. There's a lot of time to think. And so if we can eliminate that in practice, just enough to let kids see, I can do this. The only thing holding me back from that is me. It's not actually the task. Looking for things like rapid fire, looking for things where we make it fun. We mimic a movement, but we do it in like a weird way. I love weird drills. Use a lot of frisbees, use like mallets for hitting to help people learn how to rotate and kind of slingshot through the ball. Anything where it doesn't feel like work. And then that's a cue that we can use later on. Hey, use the mallet. Hey, what did it feel like when you grabbed the tennis ball? Hey, what did it feel like when you did, and then they can mimic that and get back into that mental place.
How important is it for you or for the kids to have an outside source of inspiration, like somebody that they can look up to? Do you think that helps them kind of think less?
You look at someone who has what you want and then look at what they do to get it. That's your formula for at least what am I doing, what am I not doing. It doesn't mean that everything that person does is going to work for you or is going to work for you right now, but it's something that the best athletes and the best coaches share information. And I've seen that for years. There's information out there. Jocelyn Allo, who's the best college softball hitter ever, it does a ton of clinics, and she also talks about what her process was and is to do what she did. And she said how many total home runs she had in her college career, some ridiculous number, well over 100. And a lot of it is just discipline. It's just getting out there and doing it. And if you break things into chunks, it's amazing what you can accomplish. You can look at these and get your formula. So I think it is very important. That said, there's so many different ways to skin a cat. There's so many different batting stances you can take and pitching styles you can have. And you got to look for commonalities in that too. So that, okay, this guy comes up to the plate and has this crazy stance, and this guy is out here. As soon as they get ready to hit, they're all here cocked and loaded. How can I distill that? And so encouraging kids to watch critically and look and learn to pause and replay and go back and analyze is really important.
So in this world where we have so many people just at our fingertips, and especially athletes or anybody that's in the public eye, an athlete, whether youth or adult, or maybe just somebody that's looking to get their fitness together, if they were writing a job description for the person that they should look up to, what are some of the questions that they should be asking themselves about the person they're watching?
I mean, it's source validation. And you look at that in academic research. Is this a valid source? And so understanding, and validity can mean different things, but ultimately, does this person have what I want? Do they have the level of success that I want? Do they have the physical capabilities that I want? Do they have, like, are they the type of person that I want to be? And then if all of those things are checked off the list, then let's look at the type of things that they do and the type of things that they say. If it does, and any advice you get that comes in, we've got to screen that. Is this person qualified to give me this advice? Somebody's giving me relationship advice and their life is going a way that I don't want, then maybe I say thank you and take it into account, but it's not necessarily what I'm going to go forward with. If I want athletic advice, or if I want input, or if I want to emulate somebody, I want to make sure that they have matches my goals first and foremost.
And how do you think, especially with Instagram, is that people can portray themselves a variety of ways and not always honest? How do you think, especially with kids, if they're looking out into the world, what are some of the things that kind of you look for to kind of parse out the BS from the real?
Obviously in the fitness world, and I say this with a grain of salt, certifications and degree fields, academic work, making sure that people actually have some kind of a background in that. Now, there are a ton of different certificates, like you can get a certificate for anything, but looking at the well-respected certification. So understanding, for example, if you're looking for a personal trainer, what's the difference between ACE or NASM or MPTI or like a master's degree, for example, that you may be going for, and what's required to have attained that. So if I come out here and I say that I'm certified, what did I have to do to get that? Look into it, be trust but verify. You can go in and say, okay, what did Coach Jordan have to do to go get that certification? How many hours did she have to watch different pitchers to become an NFCA endorsed pitching instructor? What courses did she have to take? Who did she have to talk to? And it takes a little extra work sometimes, but then you know it too. So then when you're looking at other sources, it's like, oh yeah, that's a reputable one, right? Because I know what it took to get there. It sounds like a lot for kids, but kids have access to phones. They have access now to everything. And so there's a lot worse things that people could be Googling than that. So
and affiliation too, right? Like you're the assistant.
Affiliation. Yep.
Your work with the Pinkman Academy, which is the most respected hitting and pitching clinic in the area, in the area where that kind of stuff is really important.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure it's with groups that you respect and have looked into. And the other thing that I want to stress is just because someone has been a great player does not mean they'll be a great coach. If you're looking for that, look at their communication style. Does it fit with you? There are a ton of kids that I see, I'm going to go do this thing with this major league player, and that person may be excellent, but they may have no concept of how to explain something to an athlete who isn't elite, or they may just not have ever thought about it, and they may be somebody who just did the work and they had some of the physical gifts and it worked out, and they don't know how to capture that or how to cue or how to explain. There are certain things you hear that are common but just aren't, like, they don't resonate a lot with kids, or they kind of create patterns that we ultimately want to break. Does this feel like it works for me? Everybody is so different. But the other part of it, yeah, affiliations. Do they have playing experience? Do they have coaching experience? Do they have certifications? Is there education behind this? Have they changed their approach to things? I think is big, because I change my approach all the time. You learn new things, and when you know better, you do better. If a coach is so committed, or an influencer so committed to this one idea because they want to be right, that is a red flag. It is an absolute red flag.
Did you have any examples kind of growing up or coming up of a high pressured athlete? Did you have any examples that you looked to?
Yeah, Lisa Fernandez was a big pitcher in softball and an Olympian, and Jenny Finch. Lisa Fernandez was great because she was short like I am and coached at UCLA for quite some time. She was somebody that I looked up to because she had a non-traditional pitcher's build. She wasn't 6 foot like Jenny Finch is, and she made it work. And Amanda Scarborough, she's somebody who I love to follow because it's somebody who has tapped into this part of herself where she doesn't have necessarily the traditional build for a pitcher, but she's been able to discipline and been able to look outside herself to figure out, how can I make this work for me? And she does a phenomenal job of working with young women to coach that. And so that's something I really respect. So there's some women for sure. I love baseball athletes as well. I mean, baseball was really the sport that I was into, and it's the sport I spend the most time around right now, other than softball athletes. I'm coaching baseball. It's pretty close to 50-50. Old baseball players, Yogi Berra, Lou Gehrig. I was coming up when Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were setting their records with an asterisk now, but Ozzie Smith was another one. I just fell in love with studying the sport and reading books and watching documentaries, not just playing the sport, but understanding the history and understanding people's approaches and why. It's just such a community.
You mentioned that you weren't physiological blessed with a pitcher's build. What do you think was one thing? You also mentioned that your pitching is a lot better now at 33 than it was.
My hitting's a lot better now. My pitching, it's not like I was throwing 70 miles an hour at all, but it's certainly more athletic now and stronger now than I was when I was younger. And
why?
Yeah.
What do you think made the difference for you?
Studying, learning. I mean, the way that when I was playing, power hitting wasn't ever something that was preached. You can kind of look at people's approaches, and I even have adults come in, adult softball players or baseball players, and you can tell how old they are almost by how they swing or how they throw, because there are very clear styles and you can tell kind of when somebody came up. And it's the same with me. Like, there was a very sort of a flat swing approach when I was growing up. There's merit to certain things, but learning how to swing up and through and hit high line drives, like, that was just not something that we were taught. And so when I started to learn that, I'm like, oh, you mean I can be 5'3" and hit balls to and beyond the fence? Nobody ever said that to me. Nobody ever communicated it. It was just swing. And so I've totally changed my swing approach from when I was an athlete now to match what I know I'm capable of. And I just didn't know. And so I think we got to be really careful about telling people who they are, because that can be determining when you talk, especially when you talk to a young person. It can be, they're very suggestible. And so you got to kind of leave things open and say, figure out who you are. Here are some ways you can figure out who you are and what kind of hitter you want to be. And let's shoot for that.
Yeah. There's this really good quote. It's a smooth sea never made a good sailor.
Yeah.
And something else that a friend of mine once said is, the worst thing that I can do for somebody is rob them of the experience. The coach, he owned MPTI, Tim Enriquez, he tells parents and the kids that he trains that even though we want things to be easy for our kids, that's not always the best way. They have to go through to figure things out so that they can become who they are supposed to be and not who somebody else thinks that they should be. That's just not how people find their thing. And I think even with exercise too, I see people all the time where they think I'm just a machine person. But neuromuscularly, we have something called degrees of freedom. If you have an expert blacksmith and he's hitting a little itty bitty piece of metal, even though he's hitting that same piece of metal every time, same exact spot, he's hitting it with 300,000 million deviations, little deviations to do the same thing. And the same thing goes with squats, and the same thing goes with these bigger compound movements. And in sport, God, you're in an environment every day. The wind might be different. You might have different outside pressures, different that rain, 2 days ago, is there still water on the ground? Like all these different environmental factors, not to mention, what did you eat earlier? There's so many things that are going to be different, these little changes. And the best way to prepare ourselves for that is to sometimes scale things down and practice small pieces, but then also practice a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I usually tell people we practice a certain approach for consistency, and we look to emulate that. There are going to be degrees to which we break that perfect form. We want to minimize it so that we can roughly predict certain outcomes or roughly predict things. But when we practice consistently, we can have a more consistent outcome because we know how to predict for those environmental factors, right? So you've got a ball that spins differently, so you've got to approach it differently. Your
point of over cueing too. Talked about this microcosm of practice small, short thoughts. Practice the small thing, but keep the thinking short. You have to give somebody opportunities to make mistakes. And this is something that I, as a coach coming up, and I'm sure you had this experience too, I really wanted somebody to get things perfect. I wanted that for them. But let the first rep be bad. Let it be bad. That is part of the learning experience. And now when I work with people, especially new people, I'm thinking I have a order of priorities in my head of what's most important. And then we're going to go from there. I want them to get this one little thing. Then we'll start building the other stuff in. And I know you probably do the same thing for the kids, and you have to do the same thing for yourself. Like you said, looking at the one little thing of let's just look at this piece of the cookie.
Yep.
And then we'll worry about the rest.
Yeah, and if we're in a safe environment, and that's usually number one, there's bats or falls, there's the other stuff falls pretty far lower on the priority list. And the other thing, as coaches, look at one thing I would encourage athletes, ask questions, ask why. If you're getting a piece of advice and it doesn't seem to match, because I hear that a lot, oh, well, this coach says this coach says that, what's the right? And it causes a fair amount of anxiety because they want playing time and they want to do the right thing. And it's what is this right thing? And welcome to the world where you're going to hear 15 people say 15 different things. But what's the outcome they're trying to produce? If a coach is telling you, for example, not to drop your shoulder, are you popping up a lot? Because if you're popping up a lot, dropping your shoulder, we need to do to elevate the ball. But what they usually mean is don't drop your hands. That's just a very common thing. What they usually mean is don't take your hands down. But what they really mean is stop popping up. And I promise you, if you hit the ball up and you hit doubles every time you hit the ball up, no coach is going to say a damn thing. And so watch for that. look for outcomes and think, okay, then what are they trying to achieve and how can I achieve that if I'm working with like a coach of my own or something? And number two, young coaches, new coaches, there's a desire to have an impact and it comes from a really good place, but there's also a desire to be an expert on everything. And I have to say something about this. I have to say something about every rep. I have to say something about this. I always have to find something. And I promise, I promise that you don't. And there are times when a kid or a teen or a young adult will do something so well and I didn't have to say a damn thing. I really didn't. And it's almost, I'm almost more proud because they were able to get there. But it takes that takes a level of maturity in a coach. And that's another way you can evaluate, like, is this coach allowing me to explore and to fail? I don't really, I mean, it's all kind of exploration, but is this coach allowing me to find myself within whatever I'm trying to do?
Yeah. It's like, I'll be like, I'm going to tell you to do this, but just know that that's not actually what I want you to do.
Yes. It happens a lot.
You'll do what I want you to do. So just got that. Just know that this is.
Oh yeah. Like, cause the internal compass is like 10 degrees over here. And so we've got to like, absolutely. Or like, I know you're going to hear it this way, so this is what we're going to say, but really what I want you to do is whatever. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, anyway, it's a fun game. It's a fun, we have a good job. So both of us are career switchers. So a lot of passion in this conversation. Jordan, where can people reach out for more information?
Reach out on Insta. Hey, Coach Jay. You can go to pinkmanacademy.com if you want to schedule a lesson. My books are open. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.